Hello and happy Tuesday afternoon. My name's Steph and I work at Melksham Library, and I'm glad you can join me this afternoon just for a little bit of a chat, some poetry I've got chosen for you today, and just maybe a few interesting information about some of the poems that I'm going to be reading and about some of the poets that I'm including today. I hope you've had a chance to make yourself a nice cup of tea or coffee. I've got my coffee here. I've made myself particularly a large mug this afternoon, so I really wanted a nice large coffee. And I hope you've got something nice as well. I'm going to start off with a poem by William Ernest Henley, who was an English poet in the 19th century. And this is a request from one of our staff at Melksham Library, from Pauline Centre, who lives in Melksham. And this is one of her favourites. And so I'm going to start with Invictus. Out of the night that covers me, black as the pit from pole to pole, I thank whatever gods may be for my unconquerable soul. In the fell clutch of circumstance, I have not winced nor cried aloud. Under the bludgeonings of chance, my head is bloody, but unbowed. Beyond this place of wrath and tears looms but the horror of the shade, and yet the menace of the years finds and shall find me unafraid. It matters not how strait the gate, how charged with punishments the scroll, I am the master of my fate. I am the captain of my soul. And that was by William Ernest Henley, who, as I said, was an English poet, and he suffered from TB at an early age, from about the age of 12. And unfortunately, he had to have his left leg amputated from below the knee when he was about 19, just before he was 20. But he didn't let that stop him. He kept going, and as the poem Invictus says, he is the captain of his own soul. And my own grandmother suffered actually from polio when she was around 20 years of age, and lost the use of both her legs and was wheelchair bound down for the next 60 years of her life. But she also always used to say that she was the captain of her own ship, and it didn't hold her back from doing all sorts of things throughout the remaining 60 years of her life. So, and I'm sure that looking back, it was this poem Invictus that obviously had an effect on her. And another interesting bit of information I found out about this poet, William Henley, is that he was actually friends with Robert Louis Stevenson. And according to Robert Louis Stevenson's letters, the idea for the character of Long John Silver in Treasure Island was actually inspired by his friend, William Henley. And I'm just read out a letter that Stevenson wrote to Henley after the publication of Treasure Island in 1883. And in this letter, he does write, "I will now make a confession. It was the sight of your maimed strength and masterfulness that begot Long John Silver. The idea of the maimed man ruling and dreaded by the sound was entirely taken from you." Wow, I think that's really powerful, isn't it? That this poet William Henley obviously suffered in his youth, but it didn't stop him. Hello again, this is my third attempt. I do seem to be having a few technical problems with my connection today, so I do apologise. So I hope you managed to listen to Invictus by William Henley, and I'm now going to read See It Through by Edgar Albert Poe Guest, who was an English-born American poet. This is See It Through, so continuing with some inspirational poetry for you today. When you're up against a trouble, meet it squarely, face to face. Lift your chin and set your shoulders, plant your feet and take a brace. When it's vain to try to dodge it, do the best that you can do. You may fail, but you may conquer. See it through. Black may be the clouds about you, and your future may seem grim, but don't let your nerve desert you. Keep yourself in fighting trim. If the worst is bound to happen, spite of all that you can do, running from it will not save you, see it through. Even hope may seem but futile, when with troubles you're beset, but remember you are facing just what other men have met. You may fail but fall still fighting. Don't give up, whatever you do. Eyes front, head high to the finish. See it through. So he mentions hope in that poem. So that was Edgar Albert Guest. And he mentions hope seeming futile. But of course, hope is such a powerful thing for so many people. And this poem I'm going to read is about hope. It's by Emily Dickinson. And it's called Hope is the Thing with Feathers. Hope is the thing with feathers that perches in the soul and sings the tune without the words and never stops at all. And sweetest in the gale is heard, and sore must be the storm that could abash the little bird that kept so many warm. I've heard it in the chillest land and on the stranger sea, yet never in extremity it asked a crumb of me. That was by Emily Dickinson. So as I say, I do apologise, we've had a few technical hitches with my connections this morning, and so I'm doing a number of poems that are quite inspirational. And I've got one here now which I'm going to read to you, and it's called A Lesson from History, and it's by a poet, Joseph Morris, who's American, and it's actually describing one of George Washington's journey whilst in the middle of battle, and it was his journey across the Delaware River in December 1776. And so the poem is called A Lesson from History by Joseph Morris. I'm sorry, a quick drink and then I'll read it to you. Everything's easy after it's done. Every battle's a cinch that's won. Every problem is clear that's solved. The earth was round when it revolved. But Washington stood amid grave doubt, with enemy forces camped about. He could not know how he would fare till after he'd crossed the Delaware. Though the river was full of ice, he did not think about it twice, but started across in the dead of night, the enemy waiting to open the fight. Likely feeling pretty blue, being human, same as you. But he was brave amid despair, and Washington crossed the Delaware. So when you're with trouble beset, and your spirits are soaking wet, when all the sky with clouds is black, don't lie down upon your back and look at them. Just do the thing. Though you are choked, still try to sing. If times are dark, believe them fair, and you will cross the Delaware. And I'm going to quickly continue this vein because there's some really lovely poems about on this theme. And this is a poem by John Greenleaf Whittier, who was another American poet. He was a Quaker, a staunch abolitionist, and he did some great poems, anti-slavery poems. But this one is about not quitting. It's called Don't Quit. He was considered one of the fireside poets because he was very popular, and the idea is that families would sit around the fire and read his poems to one another. And apparently he was inspired a lot by our Scottish poet Robert Burns. And so this is his poem, which is Don't Quit. When things go wrong, as they sometimes will, when the road you're trudging seems all uphill, when the funds are low and the debts are high, and you want to smile but you have to sigh, when care is pressing you down a bit. Rest if you must, but don't you quit. Life is strange with its twists and turns, and every one of us sometimes learns. And many a failure comes about when he might have won had he stuck it out. Don't give up, though the pace seems slow. You may succeed with another blow. Success is failure turned inside out, the silver tint of the clouds of doubt. And you never can tell just how close you are. It may be near when it seems so far. So stick to the fight when you're hardest hit. It's when things seem worst that you must not quit. So that was by John Greenleaf Whittier. Now, before I read the final poem that I've chosen for today, I actually just wanted to talk to you a little bit about this book, which is The Peculiar Life of a Lonely Postman, and it's by Dennis Theorault. And it was published, I think, in 2004. And it's a really charming book. If you haven't read it, it might be something that you might want to check out, especially if you love poetry, because it's full of poetry, but very accessible poetry. And it's in particular filled with haiku, which is a Japanese form of poetry. Traditionally, a Japanese haiku is very simple. It had the 3 phrases, and it typically in the pattern of 5, 7 and 5 syllables. And as I say, this book, The Peculiar Life of a Lonely Postman, is full of haikus. It's about a postman who starts intercepting some letters that are going between 2 people who are corresponding in verse. Anyway, it's a really lovely little book if you're interested in checking it out. And I just wonder whether some of you might want to have a go at writing your own bit of poetry, a bit of some haikus yourself. I read this book a few years ago with my book club, and we did indeed set a challenge of having a bit of fun and writing a few haikus to bring back to the following book club. One other thing I just said about haikus is that often in the haiku there's a juxtaposition between 2 ideas and opposing ideas and images. So I'm just going to read you a couple of my attempts at haiku. They're not particularly highly literary, but here you go. The first one is about the book club, and this is my haiku. It was all so smart, civilised, respectable, and then the wine kicked in. And then this is another one which is slightly deeper. It's about the candle. The glowing candle, emanating light until the flame is snuffed out. So there were 2 of my attempts at haiku. Maybe you'd like to have a go at some haiku, and maybe you'd like to share that with us, or share it with Phil next week. In fact, next week, I should point out, I believe next week our Tea and Chat is actually going to be coming from Trowbridge Library with Basil. So I think you've got a bit of a change, but do look out for the Facebook post. And I think it's actually going to be Basil next week. So yes, if you want to share some haiku with Basil next week, I'm sure he would love to hear your haiku. So I'm going to finish now on one last poem. And this one is by another American poet called Catherine Pyle, who, as well as a poet, was a children's author. And there's 2 titles for this poem: How the Little Kite Learnt to Fly, or The Brave Little Kite. And it is just about having a go and trying. I never can do it, the little kite said, as he looked to the others high over his head. I know I should fall if I tried to fly. Try, said the big kite, only try. Or I fear you never will learn at all. But the little kite said, I'm afraid I will fall. The big kite nodded. Ah, well, goodbye. I am off. And he rose toward the tranquil sky. Then the little kite's paper stirred at the sight, and trembling he shook himself free for flight. First whirling and frightened, then braver grown, up, up he rose through the air alone, till the big kite, looking down, could see the little one rising steadily. And then how the little kite thrilled with pride, and he sailed with the big kite side by side, while far below he could see the ground and the boys like small spots moving around. They rested high in the quiet air, and only the birds and clouds were there. Oh, how happy I am, the little kite cried, and all because I was brave and tried. Well, I hope you enjoyed that one. That was by Catherine Pyle. And I hope you enjoyed the few poems I chose today. They all had a similar kind of theme of kind of perseverance and trying and keep going. And I think at this time, you know, with the continuing semi-lockdown that we have, you know, it is quite trying for all of us. So, you know, hopefully these teen chat sessions and other sessions that the Wiltshire Library are putting on are helping you. I mean, we're all desperate to be back open as normal, just like I'm sure you're desperate to be out and about as normal. And it will happen, it will come. But yeah, but in the meantime, it's been great. Thank you for joining me. I hope you enjoyed your tea and coffee. I do apologise for the technical hitches at the start. My computer crashed twice. So yeah, but I'm glad that you managed to kind of get back onto listening to some of our poems. And of course they will still be there at the end, so they will still be available to listen to if you missed out any of it. Anyway, I'll finish there for now. You enjoy the rest of your day, and as I say, next Tuesday at 3 o'clock, the Tea and Chat should be coming from Trowbridge Library, and that's with Basil. Anyway, take care. Thank you for joining me. Bye.